I don't know why her words stayed with me. This is dangerous. She said it like she wasn't warning me. Not really. More like she was warning herself. And me? I'd answered without thinking. Too quick. Almost reckless. Then let's risk everything. The thing is, that line didn't come out of nowhere. It had been sitting at the edge of my tongue long before I ever said it. The first time I saw her was in the back of the bookstore, the kind that smelled like dust and old coffee. I worked there part-time, shelving books, fixing the finicky register, pretending I was just passing through life until something better happened. She walked in like she belonged in a place heavier than this. Not a corner bookstore with buzzing lights and uneven shelves, but somewhere with tall windows and velvet chairs. Mid-40s, maybe. A little older than most who stopped in. Her hair was tied back, strands slipping loose like they had their own plan. Her jacket wasn't fancy, but she wore it with a kind of ease, like she didn't need anything expensive to announce who she was. I noticed her eyes first, steady, searching, the kind that made you feel like you should be more honest than you were ready to be. She asked about a book we didn't have. Her voice was calm, low, not the kind of polite mask people put on when they ask for help, but something more grounded. I fumbled with the computer system. The damn thing froze, as usual, and I hated the silence stretching between us. You know, she said, tapping her finger against the counter. This place feels like it's falling apart, but in a comforting way. I laughed, maybe too quickly. That's one way to describe it. I call it job security. Things keep breaking, they keep me around. Her smile was small but real. For a moment, I felt like she saw through the excuse. Not just the joke, but the way I was covering for how stuck I felt. The second time she came in, she didn't ask for a book. She just wandered, fingertips brushing the spines, pausing longer at titles I couldn't guess. I tried not to watch her, but it was like every movement carried weight. She wasn't rushing anywhere. When she finally reached the counter, she placed down a novel I'd read once and never finished. This one, she said, I've been avoiding for years. Thought maybe it's time to stop avoiding things. I nodded, too quickly again. Good choice. Have you read it? I hesitated. Started it. Never finished. Her eyebrow lifted slightly, amused, like she'd caught me bluffing. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. There was a moment, later that evening, when the shop was empty. She lingered, even after buying the book. Outside, rain tapped the glass, soft but steady. I was wiping down the counter, pretending not to notice she hadn't left. Quiet in here, she said. Too quiet sometimes, I admitted. Her gaze held mine a little too long. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that I felt the air shift between us. I looked down at the rag in my hand, kept wiping the same spot. When I glanced up again, she was still watching me. Not unkindly, not even directly. Just watching, like there was something unspoken in the silence. And then, just before leaving, she said something I can't shake. You're too young to be hiding in a place like this. She left before I could answer. The bell above the door jingled. The smell of rain rushed in, then disappeared with her. I stood there, the rag limp in my hand, hearing those words echo in my head. Too young. Hiding. I still don't know if she was talking about the bookstore or me. But I do know this. The look in her eyes made me want to stop hiding. The next time she came in, it wasn't for a book. The register had jammed again, and she stood there, patient, watching me wrestle with the machine like it was alive. You'd think I was trained for this, I muttered, tugging at the drawer that wouldn't shut. You're not? She asked, leaning just slightly on the counter, her lips pulling into the faintest smile. Not really. They just assume if you're young, you know how to fix things. Her laugh was quiet, more of an exhale than anything, but it stayed with me. Not practiced. Not the kind of laugh you give out of politeness. It sounded tired, like she hadn't let herself laugh for real in a while. I finally managed to shove the drawer closed. A victory, but not one I could celebrate. My hands were clumsy with nerves. You always work evenings? She asked. I shrugged. Mostly. I like the quiet. Her eyes flicked away, down to her hands resting on the counter. For a second, something in her posture shifted, her shoulders lowering, her fingers tightening together. Vulnerable, almost. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. She straightened, the guarded calm returning like a door closing. She lingered again that night. The shop was half dark, the buzzing overhead lights leaving one corner in shadow. I pretended to reorganize a shelf, but really, I was watching her hands. Slim, restless, brushing along the edges of the books as if she wasn't reading the titles, just feeling them. When she finally chose something, she held it lightly, like even the weight of the book might slip through her fingers. "You look tired," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes snapped to mine. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd gone too far. Then she sighed, not annoyed, just real. "I am. It's been a long year." There was a silence after that. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like we both knew I'd stepped into a place most people didn't. She looked at me, really looked, in a way that made me forget to breathe. But then she pulled back again, shaking her head slightly, as if to break whatever passed between us. "You shouldn't notice things like that," she said. But I already had. The faint lines around her eyes. The way her fingers curled against the book as if holding on to something more. The quiet heaviness behind her smile. When she left, she paused at the door, her hand resting on the frame a second too long. "Good night," she said, her voice softer than before, as if something had cracked open just for that moment. And then she was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, the silence pressing in, charged with something I didn't have a name for. Something forbidden. Something that pulled at me anyway. The storm came in fast. One of those nights when the rain hammered the windows so hard it felt like the whole shop might give up and flood. We were supposed to close an hour earlier, but she was still there, standing between shelves in the back, turning a page like she hadn't even noticed the weather outside. I hesitated before saying anything. "We'll probably get stuck if you leave now." She glanced up, startled, then offered the faintest smile. "Then maybe I'll wait it out." So she stayed. And suddenly the air felt smaller, charged. I busied myself wiping counters, rearranging displays no one cared about, just to avoid staring at her. But eventually, we ended up in the same aisle, both reaching for the box of bookmarks on the lower shelf. My hand brushed hers. It wasn't much, just a light touch. But she froze. So did I? She pulled back first, standing straighter, her jaw tightening. "You should be careful," she murmured, not meeting my eyes. "Of what?" Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. Instead, she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, as if that small act could cover the silence that followed. Later, while the rain kept slamming against the glass, she leaned against the counter, and I leaned beside her. Too close, really. Our shoulders weren't touching, but the space between us was too thin to feel safe. She sighed, softer this time. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who looked at me the same way you do." Her voice cracked, just slightly. Enough that I wanted to say something, to bridge the gap. But I didn't. I swallowed it down. Instead, I asked, "What happened to him?" Her eyes flicked to mine, then away again. "He left. People always leave." The words hung there. She didn't mean for them to, I think. They slipped out before she could stop herself. And now they couldn't be taken back. That was when her phone rang. The sound sliced through the quiet. Too loud, too sharp. She glanced at the screen, and for a moment, something hardened in her face. "I should take this," she said, her voice low. I nodded, pretending not to notice how her fingers trembled just slightly as she lifted the phone. She walked to the far end of the shop, her back turned to me. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the tone, clipped, resigned. Familiar, in the way someone sounds when they've had the same conversation too many times before. When she came back, her expression was carefully composed again, all traces of the earlier crack sealed. "Sorry," she said, but her eyes lingered on mine, searching for something she didn't say. When the storm finally eased, she gathered her things. At the door, she hesitated, her hand hovering near the handle. For a second, just one, I thought she might turn back. The kind of second that stretches so long it feels like it could tip into forever. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, barely audible, "This shouldn't feel like it does." And then she stepped out into the wet night, leaving me with the ghost of words that weren't spoken and the weight of everything almost said. The night it happened, the bookstore was nearly empty. A couple of stragglers had left, and the rain from the day before had carried into a misty drizzle, fogging the glass. She was the last one there. Again. I was closing up, but I didn't ask her to leave. I couldn't. She sat at one of the small wooden tables near the back, her book open but untouched. I hovered nearby, pretending to wipe the shelves, though my rag had gone still in my hand. The silence was strange that night. Not peaceful, not tense, something in between, like the air itself was waiting for one of us to break it. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes caught mine and didn't let go. "What are we doing?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but the words carried weight, like they had been sitting in her throat for days, waiting to fall out. I froze. My heart jumped, and then nothing. I couldn't move, couldn't answer. So she filled the silence herself. "I come here to escape." "Not." She stopped, pressing her lips together. Her gaze drifted down to the table, fingers tapping lightly against the edge. "Not to start something I can't explain." I swallowed hard, trying to force out words. "I didn't." "You did," she interrupted, her eyes sharp now. Then softer. "And so did I." Her hand rested against the closed book. She looked tired, but not in the way she had before. This was a different exhaustion, one that came from carrying too much honesty and not enough room to set it down. I walked closer, slow steps that sounded louder than they should have on the old floorboards. "You think this is wrong," I said, more as a statement than a question. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Don't you?" I didn't answer right away. I could feel the words in my chest, heavy, waiting to be pushed out. "I don't know what I think anymore." She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, it was unbearable. Every second stretched. Her breathing was uneven. Mine was worse. I sat across from her, the small table between us suddenly feeling too fragile, too thin. We didn't touch, but it felt like we were already past that. Her eyes softened. "You're too young to carry this weight with me." I shook my head too fast. "That's not fair. You don't get to decide what I can carry." The words surprised me as they left my mouth, sharper than I intended. But they were true. We didn't move. The silence thickened, pressing down like a hand on both our chests. And then, almost whispering, she said, "I don't know if I need you, or if I'm just afraid of being seen by you." The words cut through everything. I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. Because in that moment, I realized she had said the thing I had been too afraid to admit to myself. Whatever this was, we could no longer pretend it was nothing. She didn't come in for a few days after that night. I told myself it didn't matter, that maybe she'd finally drawn the line we both knew was coming. But when the bell above the door finally rang again and she walked in, I felt the weight in my chest loosen, then tighten twice as hard. She looked different. Not in appearance. Same jacket, same strands of hair falling loose, but in her presence. Heavier somehow, like she'd been carrying something and had finally decided to put it down. I asked if she was okay. She didn't answer at first, just ran her fingertips along the spines of the books, the same restless habit she always had. Finally, she said quietly, "I shouldn't be here." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the same thing I'd been telling myself since the start. "Then why are you?" Her hand stopped on a shelf. She kept her back to me. "Because I don't know where else to go when the memories start pressing in." Something in her tone pulled me closer without permission. Memories of what? She turned then, and in her eyes was something rawer than I'd ever seen. A truth she had been fighting not to say. She pulled her phone from her bag, unlocked it, then hesitated before setting it face up on the counter between us. The screen showed a photo. A man, maybe late 30s, with the same kind of steady eyes she had. He was smiling, arm around her shoulders. "He died 3 years ago," she said, her voice catching but never breaking. "And sometimes, when you stand there behind the counter, looking at me the way you do, I see him again, just for a second." The air inside the shop seemed to collapse inward. I couldn't look away from the photo, but I also couldn't stop staring at her. "I remind you of him," I whispered. She nodded, barely. "Not completely. Just pieces. The way you listen. The way you notice things you shouldn't." Her hands trembled as she locked the phone again, tucking it quickly away like the photo itself was too dangerous to leave in the open. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to apologize for being a shadow of someone else. Another part wanted to step closer, to tell her I wasn't him, and maybe that mattered. But instead, I stayed still. "You don't deserve this weight," she said, softer now. "Being pulled into someone else's grief. Someone else's mistakes. I'm not afraid of that," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes found mine again, searching, almost pleading. "You should be." The words landed like a warning, but her voice shook just enough to betray something else underneath, a need, unspoken and heavy. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about me wanting her. It was about her fighting herself every time she wanted to stay. The shop was closing again, and she was still there. No storm this time, no interruptions, just the low hum of the overhead lights and the soft shuffle of pages as she pretended to read. I didn't tell her we were past closing. I didn't even move to lock the door. She looked up, caught me watching her. For once, she didn't glance away. "You should hate me for this," she said quietly. "For what?" "For letting this go on. For coming here when I knew what I was doing." Her voice was calm, but underneath it was the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting a war no one else could see. I stepped closer, slower than I wanted to. "And what exactly have you been doing?" Her lips curved into something halfway between a smile and a grimace. "Letting myself be seen. That's dangerous, isn't it?" I swallowed hard, because she wasn't wrong. Everything about this had been a slow edge towards something neither of us could name out loud. And yet, here we were. She set her book down on the counter, closing it gently, as if sealing away her last excuse. "He used to sit with me like this. Quiet. No need for words." I nodded. "We don't need them either." The silence that followed wasn't sharp or heavy this time. It was soft, almost warm, wrapping around us like something we didn't have to resist anymore. I leaned against the counter beside her, close enough to feel her presence, but not enough to touch. For a long while, we just stayed there, breathing the same air, listening to the ticking clock above the door. Her hand shifted, just slightly, brushing against mine. Not by accident. I could tell by the way her fingers lingered, then hesitated, then stilled. I didn't move away. Neither did she. She turned her head, her gaze steady on mine, and for the first time, there was no guard, no mask. Just her, tired, flawed, unhidden. "This isn't a story that ends well," she whispered. "Maybe not," I said, my voice low, certain. "But it doesn't mean it shouldn't begin." Her breath caught, and in the dim light, I saw the faintest trace of something like relief in her eyes, as if she had been waiting for permission to let go of the fight. We didn't kiss. We didn't confess. We just sat there, hands barely touching, shoulders leaning into the quiet, two people collapsing into something neither of us could deny anymore. And in that silence, more honest than any words could be, I knew. This was already love, fragile, impossible, and real. I think about that night more than I should, not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. No declarations, no lines crossed, just silence, and two hands that didn't quite let go. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment everything shifted. Not when she first walked into the bookstore. Not when her laugh cracked open something I hadn't heard before. Not even when she admitted she saw pieces of him in me. It was that night, the night we stopped pretending we were strangers. I used to believe love had to be loud, that it was about fireworks and confessions and stories people wanted to retell. But with her, I learned it can be quieter. It can live in the spaces between words, in the weight of a glance, in the decision to sit together even when leaving would be easier. She changed me, not in some sweeping, movie script way, but in the small ways that matter more. I notice things now, how people fidget when they're nervous, how laughter can sound tired, how silence can carry more truth than 1,000 explanations. And she let herself be seen again, even if just in fragments. She admitted her grief, her fear of being left behind. She didn't have to say it. I saw it in the way her hand trembled when it touched mine, and in the way she didn't pull back. We never gave it a name. Maybe we didn't need to. What grew between us wasn't neat or simple. It wasn't even safe. But it was real, and that's more than most people ever get. Some nights, I still hear her voice in my head. "This is dangerous." And my answer comes just as easily now as it did then. Then let's risk everything. Because maybe that's what love really is. Not certainty, not safety, but the willingness to risk being seen. I don't know how this story sounds to you listening. Maybe reckless, maybe fragile, maybe familiar in ways you'd rather not admit. But if it makes you pause, if it makes you think about the people you've seen or the moments you've almost let slip away, then maybe that's the point. Because sometimes the most important stories aren't the ones that end with a kiss. They're the ones that teach us how to stay in the silence together without running. So tell me, have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where nothing happened, and yet everything changed?